name's Sam Metcalf. I'm the editor of thebusinessdesk.com, and welcome to our webinar today in conjunction with global absence management software specialist eDays. Our theme this morning is change is inevitable, progression is a choice, why sickness management must be your number one HR priority. As we, fingers crossed, move past the peak of COVID-19 and businesses emerge from the lockdown, company owners and HR professionals will need to be proactive rather than reactive in how they manage employee well-being. Today, with the help of an expert panel, we'll be looking at the world of employee well-being in the new normal and learning how companies like yours can move forward with effective sickness management. So let's meet the people who are going to help us do that today. Good morning, panel.
Morning.
Morning, everyone.
I'd like to ask you all to introduce yourselves, please. Let's start with you, Leah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Neyman, and I'm the People Experience Partner at Asos.com.
Thanks, Leah. Steve?
Hi, everybody. Steve Arnold. I'm the CEO of eDays Absence Management. We're lucky enough to be working both with Leah and Paul, helping them with their absence management systems.
Thanks, Steve. And Paul?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Paul Holmes. I'm the Managing Director of Wirtgen in the UK. So we are manufacturers of heavy construction equipment for building roads.
Thanks, Paul. And last but certainly not least, Alex. You're on silent, Alex, I think.
There we go. Let's try that again. Morning, everyone. My name's Alex. I'm one of the directors here at eDays. I've got the pleasure of speaking with lots of different businesses around this topic. So looking forward to getting stuck in.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, everyone, let's just run through today's webinar and what we've got in store and how you in the audience can get involved. We have a poll running today. We'd really like you to take part. You can press on the poll button at the bottom, and more on this in a second. Shortly after that, Alex from eDays will be outlining why sickness management is vital as we exit lockdown, and he'll be hosting a Q&A session with the rest of the panel. If you have any questions you'd like to put to the panel, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the panel, at the bottom of the screen rather, and we'll do our very best to come to you a little later on in today's event. Following that, Steve Arnold, the CEO of eDays, will be talking to Leah from Asos about how her company got ahead of the game on sickness management and how eDays helped with that. And then lastly, we'll be opening up the discussion to you or the audience for a Q&A with the panelists. So as I said, please do submit your questions and we'll come to you. Okay, a little bit more about the poll. As you can see, it's probably popped up on your screens. Just to run through those questions for you. The first one is, currently, how do you track employee sickness absence? Do you know how much employee sickness absence costs your business? Do you think sickness absence has a direct impact on employee engagement in your organization? How often is unplanned absence and its impact discussed at a senior management level in your business? What are your current unplanned absence levels? And lastly, do you have tech in place to track COVID-19 sickness in your business? So if you could just go through those at your leisure, really, and we'll come and look at the results a bit later on. Right now, I'm going to hand over to Alex from eDays, who's going to be chairing a panel discussion. So over to you, Alex.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Sam. Well, thank you everyone again for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to really picking the brains of these panelists and understanding how they're managing these situations at their individual businesses. Before I do that, obviously we've got over 1,500 clients at eDays, and we're speaking to a lot of them currently around how they're managing sickness, and particularly with COVID and the impacts of COVID, businesses are trying to find new ways to manage a very new way of looking at sickness and absence. So that's one of the key reasons we're talking about it. But following that, I've got some stats as well, which doing a bit of research in the market has given us the idea about why we need to have this, why this is the topic for today. We click on, guys. There we go. Brilliant. Okay, good stuff. So firstly, we can see that an estimated 141 million working days were lost to sickness or injury in 2019 in the UK alone. Now, obviously, you could imagine for businesses that are, this is always going to be a challenge anyway, but when businesses are thinking more and more about the economic climate, and about productivity, you can see how much an impact this could have. And then secondly, go to the next slide. The CIPD did a bit of a survey, and out of 1,000 respondents, 86% said that they'd noticed presenteeism in the workplace. And obviously unplanned absence is going to be a contributing factor towards this. Again, we're going to talk more about this later, but at a time when businesses are going to be changing the way that they work, visibility of things like presenteeism is going to become more and more difficult to actually have visibility on. So again, a really, really important contributing factor. And the next slide. When we looked at a survey that Fosway Group did, you can see that 70% of HR believe they don't have the skills required to analyse and predict the impact of COVID-19 will have on their organisation. Now, I know up and down the country, across the globe, HR and people teams are looking at this and are thinking about how and what they need to do, what they need to implement to make sure they're ahead of the game with this. And then finally, we can see that an organisation of 1,000 people is typically going to save around £170,000 every month if they're able to take a proactive approach to cutting absence by putting the correct processes in place to be one step ahead of absence. So we can see there's some really, really important factors and some really important stats there that show us how important this is. And obviously the header of the webinar today was about why it should be your number one HR priority. Now that's all very, very well. I appreciate that different HR teams have different priorities, but I think what we can all agree is that sickness management handled really, really well is going to be a really important factor. So I'm going to come over to you guys now. Leah, let's start with you if we could.
Yeah. Hello.
Good morning. Good morning. I'd be really interested to know, so from an employee sickness point of view, why do you think it's so important to be looking at it so closely as a HR and a business team?
Yeah, very good question. So for us, I think when we started really looking at absence management in depth, which was probably about 4 years ago now, we kind of had a twofold thing. So most importantly, it's about the well-being of our people and understanding why people are absent and what we can do to help and support, but also, you know, we expect there is going to be a low level of people that are have high absence for outside of those reasons as well that are not sickness related. But also working in a contact centre at Asos, we manage hundreds of thousands of customers every week via different platforms like social and live chat. So we work in a really real-time environment. So we needed to understand the impact of absence on our business in a real-time stance. So yeah, they're the two main factors really for us. And like I say, it's just having that information in real time and be able to make decisions quite quickly.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. And obviously you touched on their well-being and how much of an important part it is of that. And Paul, I'm going to loop you in now. Me and you had a really good chat last week around this. So from your point of view, you know, you're obviously managing director there at Wirtgen. Why do you think, you know, keeping such a close eye on sickness is so important?
I think absolutely, to build upon what Leah said, the productivity of the company clearly, and understanding where we've got the resources and are they available. But I think the real extension to it is really understanding the trends. Why are people having absences? What are the common causes? Are there, you know, do we go through periods where we have lots of people off with flu or various other things, and really trying to get that extra granularity into not just the straight up numbers, but actually what's the cause, what's really driving those numbers, and that's about the welfare of the staff and the employees. And then is there things that we can do to change and adapt, either provide assistance to the people, either change our welfare programs, either provide flu jabs, those sort of things, to try and get in front of where we see the trends, to ultimately make sure that people don't have the absences and that we keep people productive.
Yeah, I totally agree, Paul. And, you know, from my point of view, time and time again, I see businesses who are investing in wellbeing initiatives. Quite often we'll be doing it, you know, fairly blind and not actually knowing the data that's behind that. So, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I guess same question to you as well, Steve. You've got the insight of being able to see this over multiple companies, you know, being within eDays. Why do you think this is so important?
Yeah, so I'd build on what Paul said there, really, about the patterns and the trends, and being able to analyze what's going on from a data point of view. If you're not tracking things properly, if companies aren't tracking things, they might have a very relaxed approach to sickness management and think that that's a good thing. But actually, if they're not tracking things, then how on earth are they able to observe the patterns and the trends and potentially spot early warning signs as well that might be happening within a particular individual or a particular team? If you got the data, then it allows you to approach things from a slightly different level of intelligence, really, because you can look at things and spot what's happening. Maybe you can even have ways in which you're alerted to things that are happening, which is what we're doing within obviously the eDays platform, and you can act intelligently based on knowing what's going on. And for me, employers have a duty of care to look after the employee's well-being. And actually, that duty of care, if you get it right and you're looking after employee well-being very well, then you're going to have a more productive workforce. So actually, it's all a positive reinforcement, and the business is stronger from it. That link between the absence data and the well-being of your employees, and then the productivity of your employees, all works together to come together towards a advantageous position for your business. So that's why we really encourage employers to take things seriously and to track very carefully what's going on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting that you mentioned duty of care, Steve. You know, just from my own personal point of view as an employee, it has a huge impact on me when I can feel that my employer really values my well-being and is taking that seriously. So I see how important that is. So maybe let's get a little bit more into the details now. And I think I'll come back to you, Leah, if I may. Mm-hmm. So you obviously started thinking about this, you said about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So what were some of the specific challenges or things that were going on within Asos that meant that you started to focus on this?
I think it was, so typically absence, and I think when I researched this as well outside of the world of Asos, companies don't tend to have an absence management team as such, and I think people typically think that might have a negative impact on employers, whereby you have somebody or people managing absence, but actually it's the complete opposite. And I think, like some of you have touched base on it, it's about having the employee at the forefront about their well-being and what we can do as an employee for that person. We had a really clunky process in place where, as we rapidly grew in terms of workforce as well, we had no clear process. So nobody really knew how to report their absence for the instance. And a lot of things were going unnoticed and underlying. So we kind of researched quite heavily into how we can manage that. And we put a team together, and thankfully it worked out absolutely positively. So yeah, we had a really good response from our employers, but as time's gone on, and we'll talk about it shortly in terms of how we can implement a system to help us, and it is also driving that insights and analysis out as well, about the impacts that we then would have on our customers outside of that.
Yeah, you touched on a really point there as well around sort of the taboo that sometimes surrounds sickness, absence. It sounds like that was prominent in Asos at the time. It was a bit of a naughty word as such. You know, nobody really talk about it, whether that's employee or employer.
That's it. And you have to, I mean, one of my objectives at the beginners as well is, what do we call the team that manages absence? And we were really careful not to call it an absence management team, because even in the notion of the words that we use, we didn't want it to have that, you know, we are forcing something on people. So we were really careful about what we called the team, how we managed it, the process, how we launched as well. And like I say, all those steps that we took ensured that we had that positive impact, and then processes were adhered to from then on.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. And obviously you you put certain things in place. You mentioned some of the challenges there. What were some of the impacts of those challenges? What was happening? What was the outcome of those?
I think we launched with manual integration, so the classic spreadsheets and stuff like that. So we launched without having that sort of the systems in place and the infrastructure. But also, how do we reach out and communicate this to, you know, a wide range of people? We wasn't managing absence for 10, 15, 20, 100 people. It was, you know, in the region of 2,000. So we had to get our communications really clear as well. So we did a lot of background work to launch that. So yeah, that was the biggest challenges. And then launching it and then managing that overnight. You know, we had a real shift change. And yeah, it was about, I think, more the systems that we used. And we'll talk about that again in detail, about the timeframes it took us just to manage one absence.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And Paul, I'll come to you, and we'll talk through a similar vein. I'm very aware, obviously, the different types of business Asos is to Wirtgen. So, what were the challenges that you guys were facing around this?
Again, I think very similar to Leah. I mean, we're clearly not as big as Asos. We're about 120 people, but I think that clunkiness of the system we used to have a paper-based system for capturing when people were ill, what type of illnesses they had. I think the other side to it is sickness absence was really managed in almost an anecdotal way. I used to receive at the end of the month a board pack which had, this was how many days absences we had within the company in the month, but there was no detail there. There was no trending, whether it was in particular departments. It was very anecdotal. And when I went to speak to the management team, they'd all have a story of such and such is always ill. And, you know, it was very anecdotal and there was no detail behind it. And it's really that sort of need to put in place to get some of this data that just clears away a lot of that noise, so that you can then deal with the facts. I think picking up on the point of impact is actually managing sickness absence is not just about managing the individual who may be having that absence or having that reoccurring absence, but it has a wider impact on the whole team that it isn't sick. And the fact that that whole team look to the employer to say, well, what are you doing about it if this person is constantly ill or constantly ill on a Monday morning? What, you know, they're looking to the employer to say, well, what are you doing? And I think by putting some of that in place and when we really started to look at it, you do get a bit of, you know, we clearly saw a bit of peer pressure, for want of a better word, and peer management within the teams, but also a recognition that we weren't just letting it slide. And actually that improved the morale of the wider team, that we were taking absence or what people sometimes perceived as unnecessary absence by individuals. We were taking it seriously and looking to put things in place that was actually to the benefit to the whole team, and therefore improve morale.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on an interesting point there as well, Paul, around the sense that obviously there is some sickness absence that is good sickness absence. Yeah. And at days, it's one of our core beliefs that we believe absence is good and people need to take the time off. But you're right, there is the other side of it where, you know, people might be abusing the system. But you've got a really nice story around how, with your new way of doing it, you were able to spot a challenge with an individual and you were able to support, weren't you?
Absolutely. We had again, you know, anecdotally, we had an employee who was always seemed to have a trend of always having a Monday morning off. And, you know, a lot of the anecdotal evidence was, yeah, he's always having, you know, the Monday morning every other week. And why was that? And, you know, you get all the anecdotal points of, oh, he had a heavy night or he went to the, you know, whatever. And when we were able to sort of collate that data, and the guy was a really good employee, but we couldn't understand this. And when we actually sat him down and talked to him about it and displayed it, he said, yeah, absolutely. And when we looked at the excuses he was maybe putting in for why he wasn't coming in, when we actually challenged him with the data, he actually said, well, the reality is I'm a carer. And at the weekend, I care for my elderly grandmother, and Sunday, quite often on a Sunday night, I'm up all night with her and I don't, and that affects me from the Monday morning. And he's a really conscientious employee, but he felt that he couldn't, for whatever reason, he didn't want people to know that. And therefore, it enabled us to then put in place some support for him, both mental support and some physical support to make sure that he didn't have that time off.
Yeah, and that's huge. That is, I think, for other employees to be able to see that, using the words duty of care again, that as a business you have taken the responsibility on there is massive. A big well done on that. I think that you just credit for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Alex, can I jump in on this one around those challenges? Because of course we hear from so many different companies who are telling us what their challenges are. And a lot of them are in the same situation that Leah and Paul were in regarding manual approaches. And most companies have some sort of policy, some sickness policy, but the consistent approach to actually running that policy is often absent. Excuse the pun, but they want to use they're using paper forms to complete return to work processes. They're completing spreadsheets, they're sending emails, they're doing various things in terms of doctor's notes that might be on forms that go in a filing cabinet. And all these manual approaches fail because normally they're not very simple. And when there's not simple, people are too busy to do them quite often because, oh, well, that person's back in the office now, let's just crack on, as opposed to completing the process, which would give them the intelligence that they actually need to maybe do something about it in the future. And it's also very difficult for finance and payroll teams if they haven't got the accurate data. If there is a policy where people go into a little bit of a different pay code because they've been off sick, then they just don't know because the systems or the processes they've got in place aren't being followed. So if there isn't that consistent approach, then companies won't comply to their own internal policies, which kind of renders them useless. And then you also have the situation where data might not be protected adequately. The sensitivity of absence data, it's very high up there, especially with the new GDPR rules, but just generally with data, sensitive data protection, you need to not have things flying around on paper. And even the very large businesses that we get coming to us looking at maybe automating this process within the eDays platform, even if they've got an HR system, they're finding that they're supplementing it with paper forms and spreadsheets to do different calculations and things. And it becomes really complicated. Then the data isn't reliable in the first place. So I would say that one of the challenges is keeping this process simple and making sure that if you don't keep things simple, you're going to struggle with compliance. So making sure that simplicity is embedded within the organization will really help people like Paul spot those trends of patterns of behavior, because the data is actually getting inputted in the first place. I keep coming back to data, but we've just put in a trademark for absence intelligence because we think that's the kind of the thing that we're trying to really get companies thinking about now is to look at data and the intelligence you get from that. So I just thought that would be a useful thing to add there on that question.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to be honest with you, Steve, you've led it nicely onto what I wanted to talk about next, which was around data. From everything all three of you have said so far, it feels like one of the biggest problems was a lack of visibility of what was going on. So Leah, from your point of view, what do you think, for maybe for people who are listening, who are maybe a couple of steps behind yourself and where you are now, what sort of data points should people be paying a lot of attention to? What are those key patterns and trends that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think ultimately you need to build a bit of trust as well. So ultimately we need to have people be open to us when they contact us and not give us kind of really high level information. So that was really key for us to kind of gain that trust. But in terms of insights and data, it's not just looking at the reasons why somebody off, it's also looking at patterns, which Paul touched on. So if you really dig deep and analyse, you will start seeing some really kind of insightful trends and some kind of weird and wonderfuls as well. So I think one of the things that we noticed was that absence tended to spike before payday. So people that particularly spend money on petrol, public transport and stuff, we see a little spike just before that, which we never would have been able to have spotted before. There's internal and external factors as well. So we can kind of start being a little bit proactive. So for example, things that are external in terms of events. So World Cup, I think, is probably one that we might all remember. But yeah, you can start to really kind of, if you look back, but it enables you to sort of look forward as well. So internal factors, we've found that any changes to processes and policies as well that people might not tend to be happy with, you might have an impact on that. There are also stuff that for us, working in a contact centre with young adults, mental health was really high, but we didn't really understand what that was because it is quite broad. So yeah, I think data is absolutely key because it helps you make tactical decisions, but also be able to give the right resources and support to people as well.
Yes, really important.
Yeah.
I'm almost imagining the Asos contact centre with a huge screen up for the next World Cup to cut down those hours.
Yeah, and you know, it's one of those things you can't predict, but again, working with young people, these things do happen, and if people can't get the time off, they'll find another reason to get the time off. But yeah, we have put things in place.
No, Leah, on that one, I know of some of our customers, and I know this is maybe bordering on Big Brother-esque, but they build reports that allow them to see which employees have gone off sick on days where they've requested holiday that's been rejected.
Yes.
Because sometimes you might need to reject holiday from people if they're all taking. If everyone wants the day after the England match off in the business, then you're going to struggle to deliver what you need to as a company, of course. So you can't allow everybody to be off, and often you'll have minimum staffing levels at different times of the year as well. But then if you've got people who are taking those times off sick, then and it's kind of obviously less likely to be genuine because of what's gone on. Then it's quite useful to be able to see who those individuals are, so that you can have quiet words with them, or you just are aware that these things are happening in business. So yeah, it's again, it comes down to the data points. Just on the data points, by the way, Alex, from me, I know that customers always want to know about the durations of absence, the average durations, the length. If there's a sickness reason that is a particular, let's say it's stress related, on average, how long does that last for? How many days is that person likely to be out of the business for? How many occurrences are happening in different teams? What date periods are kind of proving spikes? And all of that allows, especially businesses like Asos that have real need to have a certain number of people in the team at any one time to deal with the demand on the queries and things. It gives you a better insight into the workforce planning to know, right, I can predict this many people are likely to be off during this day or this week or this month on each day. So I know how many people I need to staff over and above the normal level to sort of build in the fact that a certain number of people are going to be off. They're the sort of data points that I know have been really useful for Asos and for other businesses.
Absolutely. Paul, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to. I think you spoke a little bit about data earlier, so I'm keen to come and talk to you a little bit about employee experience. I mean, we know how important it is that employees feel supported through sickness. I just wondered what you thought good looked like there. What does a good process for a business look like to support their employee through sickness?
Well, I mean, maybe just going backwards slightly, just picking up on the data. I think we can get lots of good trend data, but I think one of the best things from the data side is actually the live data. I mean, one of the biggest impacts we've seen is just the way we work. Just by being able to capture the sickness, we have a requirement for all of our employees to, if they are ill, to notify us either directly on the system or through our reception, who can fill in on the system by 8 o'clock in the morning. And then it just allows our receptionist to use the system to actually know who's in the building, who's actually available for work on that day. So when a phone call comes through, they're able to distribute that call without trying to see, oh, that person's ill today. And again, that's what I call about, that's the live data rather than the trend data. And again, that's amazing how just that little thing changes the efficiency of the organization. So live data alongside trend data is really important. And I think that's about the experience. Again, that then leads on to the experience of the user, because it's making it easy. It's making it easy for them to register that they are real, to capture that information rather than, and they can do it live, rather than wait to fill in a form when they come back. They can also help them understand their own absence. And I think that is a big thing, because when they're able to see that there is a trend occurring here, there is a trend that something's occurring every Monday or before payday or whatever, and actually, you know, they can see that, because if they can see it, we can see it, and actually then they probably realize that that's going to end up in a conversation. And I think that's good. So it does provide the system is not just about, or the benefit is not just about for me as a manager, a leader of a business to manage the team. Hopefully it provides some degree of self-management of the individual, for them to ultimately take some of their own responsibility for their sickness, welfare, and attendance, and therefore understand that data. And again, are they getting, similarly, are they getting trends, or are they getting a flu-like symptoms or cold or sickness and diarrhea every month? Is there something underlying for themselves, which may say, actually, this is a common occurrence, and actually, maybe I need to go and pick that up in a medical.
Can I cut in on that one, actually, Paul?
Yeah.
Because I think that's really a trend that we're finding now as well, that companies are investing a lot in EAP services, in occupational health services, to make sure that there's the follow-on help for people. But the problem is, a lot of the companies are investing in those things on their own. They're not linking those initiatives to the absence data or the absence system. So what we've started doing within the portal, within the eDays portal, is signposting people to certain follow-on resources at the time that they most need them. The obvious one that we built in was the NHS Choices, which is kind of a symptoms checker. So if you're logged off as sick, either yourself or by your manager for a particular reason, it will then give you information about that reason, specifically given to you by the NHS. So it's a very authoritative sort of source for UK-based businesses. But we've also started tying in virtual doctor as well. So if you're off sick, you get a notification from eDays saying, look, we understand you're off sick. If you feel like you need to visit a doctor, don't forget you have this benefit. And then a link in there to allow them to book a doctor's appointment actually online immediately, and have that appointment within a couple of hours. And that early intervention will help that employee hopefully come back to work quicker, but also shows that you care as an employer, like genuinely care, as opposed to sort of just paying lip service to it. Yeah. So I just thought I'd mention that, because you kind of touched on it a little bit as well. Yeah. What happens next? Absolutely.
I think the final bit for the individual is ultimately the financial impact of sickness and illness for them as an individual, because we have a sickness policy where we will pay an individual, full salary for a certain period, a number of days in a year's period, before they drop onto statutory sick pay. And again, being able to capture that information does actually help them make some informed decisions for, actually, if I am sick for 4 days or for whatever the reason, this could have an impact ultimately on their financial position, because they've either used up the full salary benefit of sickness, and they're going to be moving into statutory sick pay or beyond. And actually it does just recognize them of that financial impact of sickness, not for them as an individual, not just for the employer.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Paul. And actually it can go both ways as well. I know we've spoken to businesses in the past who actually reassessed what their policies look like internally, because they looked at the same data and maybe decided that they need to give more support.
It's been an interesting thing. Certainly when we've in the current crisis with the furloughing and COVID and self-isolation and all of those things, that's really has come into play in the recent months of people, needing to self-isolate. Am I going to get statutory sick pay? Am I going to get covered in terms of my wages because I've got a shield? All of those things have come into a lot greater focus around people understanding what is the impact of self-isolation. Do I, if I go on holiday now and I've got to self-isolate, am I going to be covered or not covered? What's the pros and cons of the actions that people take?
Absolutely. Now, I want to, Paul, you mentioned something there around the complexity, about it being quite difficult sometimes. So I want to send that back to you, Leah, if I can, and keep it focused around employee experience a little bit. Because quite often we hear, well, time and time again, we hear actually that one of the reasons people potentially don't have the data that they require around sickness absence is that it's just been made too complicated for the individual to log it and for the manager to approve it. Now, you've obviously got experience in your job title, so you're obviously thinking about that a lot. What do you think a good experience looks like for an employee?
Definitely, and I think that was a massive key factor in when we researched for an absence management system was how do we make it easy for somebody to log their absence? We don't want to make it complicated. How do we make it effective in real time as well? And also giving people the information up front. And I think, like Paul said, we made a decision, a conscious decision, to give people their own kind of absence allowances. So we have company sick pay at Asos, depending on different factors like length of service, and to give that allowance and balance to them in their own system, which they can see. I think the stigma was a bit like, oh, this could go, a little bit wrong. Actually, if we want to treat people like adults and give that information up front, put the onus on that individual first of all, but also making it really, really, really simple and quick for somebody to log an absence. We don't want to, particularly if somebody is suffering or is, genuinely sick, we don't want to make that task hard in any way, shape or form. So eDays has massively enabled us with that. So over time, we've made it even more simple, but also to give the resources up front as well. So knowing what somebody has contacted us about, it might be that we give them the EAP number or our virtual GP details, depending on what they're contacted for. So it's really, 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 really key for us to give as much information up front as possible, but to make that experience as simplistic as possible.
Yeah. Excellent, brilliant. Okay, well, I'm aware that we're potentially running a little bit over time. I feel like we could probably talk about this all day. So I'm going to put it out to all three of you now. So the final question, I'm really keen to understand some of the successes. So we've spoken about the challenges, but I'd really be keen to know sort of after you implemented systems, processes, consistency, what were the successes you saw? Let's go to you first, Paul, if we can.
Yeah, we've had some really great successes, and the successes have been around the openness for the individual, for the team. I think there's a real belief that it's not about pulling people up and using it as a tool to beat people, for want of a better word. It's been used as an open tool for everyone can see. All the anecdotal comments have gone. People can now see the evidence. They can self-manage themselves. The team, their colleagues can self-manage the teams, and they can see that as an employer that we will act on it, that we will have conversations with people and get behind it. I think the other side to it is the success of it is it's actually changed some of our welfare policies in terms of whether we've provided more help on mental health awareness, on support. We put all our employees through a medical every year, and again we've just changed some of those. Some of the things that we were testing them for every year based on some of the sickness and absence. We brought in flu jabs for everyone every year because we were seeing some trends, and that was having an impact, as we get into flu season, and that's really, really positive that we've managed to take the data act on it, which I think has improved the welfare of our employees, and actually, you know, the issue of we're not managing the anecdotal stuff of we're not managing sickness absence has really gone away. And the reality, the bottom line, our overall numbers have dropped in terms of man days lost has dropped. You know, we've seen about a 25% drop in man days lost.
That's 24. Wow, that's fantastic. And have you noticed a difference in terms of the impact that's had on business productivity?
Yeah, again, it takes away those stress. You know, I think with sickness, there's very particularly, you get stress moments. You know, when you come into flu season, whatever you want to call it, you can see those trends happening. School holidays is another classic one. You know, where you get where you get a workforce, you know, that has childcare issues and those sort of things, and using absence as a means to manage childcare, and picking up those issues is, you know, let's work with them. Let's understand what the challenges are. Can we be more flexible in your working? You know, rather than just take the day off. Well, actually, if it means that you've got to do childcare for the first 2 hours of the morning before you can arrange something, talk to us about it. You know, and we can maybe change how we work.
Brilliant. Okay, it sounds like you've had some really positive results there, Paul. Thank you. And Leah, same question to you in terms of successes.
Yeah, very similar actually. So I think the biggest thing for us, again, it's going back to that trust factor. So having people being more open and honest about why they're off, first of all, and not just being, you know, very high level or actually not giving any information at all. Giving line managers the information and all that kind of the insight and data that they need to have those open and honest conversations as well was really, really key for us. Efficiencies for my own team in terms of how we were managing absence, giving real-time insight into who is off in particular teams, enabled our internal teams to make tactical decisions for our customers. And also just drawing out what it is that we can do as a business to help people as well. So we've had some real success stories with individuals, and I think ultimately it's just been really, really positive. But we have driven down absence, and again, it's not kind of penalised. We haven't penalised anybody as such, but we've put processes and things in place to help people, whether that be that we change or amend their shifts, the days that they work. So yeah, we've had some. Ultimately, it's been positive for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I speak to a lot of businesses now whose main aim is to actually increase absence to start with, so they get the true picture of what's going on, and then once they have the true picture, then you can work to support to reduce those levels.
Yeah,
that's really great to hear. And then Steve, you know, I'll come back to you. Obviously, as I say, you've got great insight into lots of companies. What are the successes that you've seen?
I'd build on some of the other ones that we've already heard, and then add maybe a little bit more on the successes around how additional add-on services are actually now being utilised a lot more. So definitely we've seen reduction in absence for organisations that are doing things properly, and that's brilliant to know that, because although we're not trying to force people to work who shouldn't be working, we can, with the data and the alerts within the system, you can do things like what Leah was just saying, is you can take positive steps to deal with a particular employee's circumstances or a team's circumstances. I remember a time when at E-Days, actually, we for the first time, we had a team that was actually going off more often on sickness, and I was alerted to that situation. And then when we actually looked at it, we realized that team was understaffed, really. You know, they're pulling late hours, working super hard, you know, all credit to them, but actually they needed some more people, and they needed a bit more of a different organization around how it was being handled. So it's great to be able to see those steps even within E-Days. But the other point was really around the utilization of the occupational health services and the EAP services, is that so many companies are just doing that as a rubber stamping. They're saying, right, we need to have an EAP because we're a certain size company, we need to be able to having these occupational health thing, and it's become very commoditized, that market. But for the first time, we're now actually been able to get better utilization of those services. The same with virtual GP, by the way, because there is a place for an employee to go to access them, and there's a signpost for them to go and use this service if they want to at a certain time, as opposed to at some point realizing, oh, I need to use, I might have some counseling service available to me within the organization's benefits. How on earth do I get to that? And having to do that's the last thing you're probably going to do when you're not feeling up to it. You know, you need to be told and shown that this is available to you guys. You know, why don't you use this help? So using those resources more is good to see.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for the discussion, guys. That was so useful. Thank you all for all of your input. I really appreciate that. I'm going to get in trouble with Sam now for overrunning massively. But as I say, I think people have found that fantastically useful. So thank you ever so much. I'm now going to pass back over to Steve and Leah, who I think we're going to go into the Asos story in a little bit more detail. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Right, now it's my turn to get some information out of you, Leah. Thanks again for agreeing to share a bit of the Asos story with us today. You know, I remember coming to see you back in summer 2018, which seems like ages ago now. And gosh, so much has happened since then. But I do remember it being a very memorable meeting, because I was just really impressed to see how Asos was approaching its general service delivery. There's such a clear focus on the customer experience, a very slick operation, and so much technology driving that business. And it sort of became quite clear to me why Asos was such a market leader, because you seem to be kind of as much a technology business as a retailer. And that really excited me, because I thought, look, if we can play a little role in this and helping this business become even better, then that's going to be really exciting for us, and obviously a great brand for us to bring into our roster. So anyway, getting into some of the questions for the audience, perhaps you could just start off with just a very short overview of Asos. I know most people will probably know about the company, but just a little bit of an overview. Great.
Sure. So we're an online fashion website. We ship to pretty much every country in the world, servicing customers in 20 different languages. So our workforce in our contact center, as you can imagine, is huge. We offer customer service across different channels, whether that be social, so Twitter, Facebook, live chat, email and phone as well. Currently, we have around 20 million active users. Globally, we receive around 150,000 contacts per week into our contact center. So just going back to the impact of absence, we have to make real-time tactical decisions. I've actually been with Asos for 18 years now. I predominantly have worked in our contact centre, but I now work in the people experience team, which is also known as HR.
Yeah, I was going to touch more on your role. So I know you joined when the business was literally 10 people or something. I think you told me a story about taking a parcel yourself to the post office to post it to somebody who'd ordered online. And I just think that's amazing to think what that organisation has become. Yeah, just going a little bit more into your current role and the role of your team would be quite interesting, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, so I launched the absence management team about four or 5 years ago now. That was a team that was solely to manage absence end to end. So that was taking the call, booking in the return to work, giving the information to line managers, etc. But moving into the last year or so, I've kind of gone into the HR world, and I've merged with another team, and we now manage the people experience for all of our Asos. So currently we have about 3,500 globally employees that are mainly in our Leavesden office and our London office, but we have employees in America, Hong Kong, etc. We look after, we call it shared services, so we call PX Hub. So we're the hub of HR. We take on contacts from our employees, whether that is somebody that wants to contact to ask about their pay, understanding their pay slip, to why does their staff discount doesn't work. So we're a shared services now. So the way I explain it is that we're internal customer service. So our employees are our customer.
Got it. Yes, it sounds like quite a big remit that you have there now, and quite a big population. Yeah. By the way, we borrowed the Asos's. We're now Edazers here. That's the way we put it. Doesn't quite have the same ring, but okay. So I remember that initial meeting, and we drew a map of your current processes and the challenges you were having, and there was spreadsheets, there were forms, there was Workday, there was TNA systems, there's various things all coming together in the sort of absence management process. Could we now just zero in on some of those challenges? I know you touched on them a little bit earlier, but the main challenges that you were facing and why you came to talk to us in the first place.
Yeah, so touching base, I think probably is a common theme, is that we were using extremely manual processes. So we had an internal system that was in-house built, that we built ourselves for managing absence. We then were using a lot of spreadsheets and doing a lot of manual calculations in terms of pay. We had a phone number where people called us, which we logged onto a system, but then we had to gather lots of information, everything from what team did they work on, who was their line manager, what shift did they work, and then going into the world of booking and return to works, it was a really, really long process. So we needed something that just captured all of that and basically did it for us, so we didn't have to have that manual intervention.
I remember you told me at that time that your team were having to work extra days and weekends, I think, where they wouldn't normally be working weekends in order to complete some of those tasks. So what sort of impacts was it having on the business, though? So, you know, the fact that it was so complicated.
I think as we got busier, we were taking on more calls, more data, and the speed of the insight that we were giving was slowing down, which had a huge impact. One of the other things as well is that as some of our processes change, they become more complicated to manage. And also we went paperless as well, so we had to radically change even things like our return to work process. So yeah.
Could we go in, sorry there, Leah there.
Okay.
Let's go through the process that you went through to try and resolve some of those challenges a little bit. And I know obviously eDays was involved as a part of that process, but just understanding how you tackled it.
So I think, well, one of the things was just researching how do other companies manage absence when it comes to systems. I had an idea in my head about exactly what I wanted, and then looking out into the world of absence management, typically it's kind of a side process. So you usually use systems that manage scheduling, holidays, etc. And absence was always a bit of a sort of a last thought. And then I found eDays, which kind of ticked all those boxes. So it was speeding up the process for us. It was giving that data and insight as well. And it was about real time and making that people experience even better than what it was.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. You did a big market process, didn't you, looking at what was out there, and you already had some advanced people management systems in that sort of felt like you needed the specialist system to deal with the way that you wanted to deal with things there. And what would you say with the end results, though, if we look at today, you know, and how things are running?
Wow. I mean, we don't talk to anybody. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we changed. So the self-serve was key for us. So my team were taking calls. So we would take calls before people started their shifts, and we're a 24/7 business as well. So we had to work Monday to Sunday, 6 a.m. till 9:30 p.m. We now don't have to do that. So my team now work Monday 9 to 5:30 because the system in the background does everything that we would need to do. So our employees can self-serve, and everything happens automatically. What we then can do is look at the insights and the data that's coming through, and we've improved massively on the processes, the information that we're giving out, but also ensuring that, you know, the impact on people in terms of like their pay, for example, is absolutely at the forefront as well.
So whilst you were having to spend lots of time sort of doing the nuts and bolts and the administration of all of this, you're actually now able to use that time better to do more value add things.
100%. Absolutely. And I think when I met you, I think it was a bit of a shock. And even when I look back, I can't quite believe it myself, but to manage one absence for one person end to end, and that was everything from taking the phone call, logging it, informing a line manager, processing their company sick pay, booking in there to return to work, and that end result was about 75 minutes per person. That now on average is about 5 minutes, if not less.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I guess from that you can draw the ROI by doing the calculations within the numbers. I mean, but it's very clear with that sort of dramatic time reduction. It's great. It's great to hear. Okay, so final question. And again, thank you so much for being so open with everything that you've been doing. If you had to make some recommendations then to other companies following your experience with absence management, what would they be if you just had to pick up the top 2 or 3?
Oh, blimey. I think, oh gosh, I would say it's that manual intervention. Like I say, when I look back sometimes, it's quite hard to believe that even 4 years ago, some of the stuff we were doing. So the manual approach, it just has to be wiped out. And it's from a data protection point of view, but also ensuring that we're getting things right. Having defined clear processes for the entire company, really. So understanding what the process is and just making sure everyone's adhering to it as well. We want to treat people fairly and consistently, and that was one of our biggest key factors, ensuring that people are being treated the same, doesn't matter who you are or where you are. And then just that insight, so giving that data out to certain teams and managers across the business has been absolutely key. So I would say those 3 things without a doubt.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I really hope that helps some of the audience with their thinkings. Thanks again. I think back to you. Is it Sam we're going back to now for some Q&A? I know we haven't got much time left.
Don't worry. I just wanted to go through some of the poll results, really, because there's a couple of really revealing sets of figures, really. The one that strikes me first is number 2. Do you know how much employee sickness absence costs your business? 70% of respondents don't. Which is a bit, I don't know, maybe not a shock to you, but seems is a shock to me. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that, Steve and Alex.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can go. I mean, yeah, it's not that much of a surprise to us because, you know, we speak to these businesses all the time. I think what is a surprise and what we're hearing more and more with the more forward-thinking businesses is that they do want to know this now. And we're finding that businesses that previously have gone, you know, years without even mentioning absence or the cost of absence in leadership meetings or in board meetings, it's now starting to get a table in these meetings, and they're now starting to think about actually how much of this is happening, what's the impact of that, and what do we need to do about it. So no, that the only thing is I'm not surprised, no.
Okay, I guess that links in with number 5 as well, that people don't know what their current unplanned absence levels are. Steve, as the last 3 months in COVID-19 muddied that slightly, I guess people don't know at the moment, do they? It's a bit of a changed arena, I guess.
I think when companies are still using manual methods for absence management, they won't know quite often, because the spreadsheet that might be controlling all this will be in some sort of some office somewhere and that you can't access. So and all the paper form that you need to fill in has been, you know, isn't printable, and you know, those sort of things just aren't getting done. If you've got an absence management system, then you'd hope that things are still very easy to keep control of. And in fact, companies, the ones that we've seen, so we have actually changed the way they're using e-days quite a lot in order to get more information. Because when they're assessing who can come back to work, it might be very important to know who's already had COVID-19, but also to know who's self-isolated, who hasn't, who's displayed symptoms of consistent with COVID-19, to make sure that those people are staying away from the office. Instead of trying to get people back to the office as quickly as possible, they're now trying to keep people away. And of course, it's not just offices; it's other places of work and factories and other establishments that you need to think very carefully about who can come back to work and why and when. So people are doing things differently, but those companies that don't have systems, it's almost impossible for them to roll something new out. So I think we will see a big transition from companies. It said something like 47% there. I think we're using manual systems or other in there on the poll. And we should send that round to everybody, by the way.
Yes, we will do.
Yeah. I don't think that number will be the same in a year's time. I think that number will probably be half that amount, because there will be companies thinking, actually, no, this is important. This could happen again. We want to be prepared. Actually, we need to look after our people better. And hopefully that will see a transition to the companies taking it a bit more seriously.
Sorry, Steve, can I just touch on that? I know we're running out of time, but I forgot to mention as well, and I think this is probably one of the biggest things, is what eDays has enabled us to do is to really have that immediate insight when it comes to unforeseen things like COVID. So we was able to amend the system as we see fit, rather than having to go to a third party like yourselves and get you to do it for us. So things like recording self-isolation, shielding, symptoms and everything, we were able to do with immediate effect. So that was one of the biggest things for us as well.
Great.
Leah's just answered my next question, really, but I'm going to go to Paul. I'm going to go to Paul and say, just your experience, Paul, about what you're using the eDays systems during the last 3 months. What's your experience been, and what has your staff feedback been?
Yeah, I absolutely concur with Leah. I mean, the ability to track who's self-isolated. I mean, we actually used the absence system and who's self-isolated. To understand how we selected people. We furloughed 2/3 of our workforce. We actually use that as some of the criteria to how do we select people for furloughing, and also recognizing who have got dependencies, whether they're carers, whether they've got children. We've used the system ourselves to understand exactly as Leah said, how do we bring people back in a staged manner, in the right places, in the right teams, etc. And the other side to it is in terms of application to HMRC for records of people being on furlough. We don't have a manual system. We can just print off from eDays now the backup to these people in terms of our application should we get an audit from HMRC in the future. We've got a record straight away that says this is when they were furloughed, this is when they were self-isolating. Does that match with your records that we're claiming for? There you go. We're not going to have a big process should the tax man come through the door one morning.
There was a big report this morning about 1/3 of staff, wasn't there, working when they shouldn't have been. So that's really positive for you guys. Yeah. We have got a few more questions, but time has really beaten us, hasn't it? If it's okay with you guys, we'll forward those questions on to you and you can respond to them individually, if that's okay with the panel.
Yeah, we could put a sort of all the questions together and send them out to everybody who's signed up for the webinar, so that that
sounds perfect. Okay. Before we go, I'd like to remind today's guests that the recording of today's webinar and the slides will be shared with you all, along with a copy of the excellent new eDays report, which is called How to Manage Sickness Through Absence Intelligence. There'll also be coverage of today's webinar on the Business Desk website tomorrow and Monday and Tuesday of next week. So please do have a look at that. I'd like to thank eDays for supporting today's webinar. And all the panel for their excellent insights and everybody who joined to listen in as well. So thank you to all and goodbye.